Jonah chapter 1, verse 15, 16, and 17. So the sailors picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea, and the sea ceased from its raging. Then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord, and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. The Lord told Jonah to arise and to go to Nineveh to prophesy a warning of God's destruction. But Jonah got up and went the wrong way. He ran from the Lord. He tried to get away from his presence. He hid from him the way Adam and Eve did. He went down to Joppa, down to the ship, and down into the bottom of the ship to sleep. He was told to arise by the captain, and then picked up by the crewmen and thrown overboard. Then he went down into the water. Before we find out the details about that, we find out that the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. We see that God has claimed sovereignty over the lives of the men in Nineveh, and that he has sovereignty over the wind and the waves, and even this great sea creature. He has sovereignty over the men on the boat, too. The sailors threw Jonah over in obedience to God. Later on in the book, Jonah admits that it was God who threw him into the water, not the men, as they were only secondary causes. Those men, it seems, are converted to Yahweh worship at the time, as they immediately sacrifice to him once the sea is calmed and they see his power. Jonah here has been the failed servant Israel. He's been going in the wrong direction. Israel was to be a light to the nations and to spread God's dominion over the earth, as were Adam and Eve in the first place before their original sin. But Israel has never done that. They are a failed servant, and Jonah, the prodigal son, has proven to be that failed servant thus far. At this point, though, it seems he's repented. He took full responsibility for the cause of the storm and told the sailors that they had to throw him overboard in order to calm it. At this point, we come to something that gives critics a lot of ammunition against the Bible, supposedly. One is the fact that Jonah is swallowed by a whale or a fish. People will say there are no fish that could do that, and of course there are. The Mediterranean and the Red Sea both are home to large enough fish, sharks, and whales to swallow a man whole if that had to be the case. We don't need to prove that there is a creature out there right now that could do this. God appointed this great creature himself. Perhaps he created it specially for this occasion. Perhaps he miraculously made it able to swallow Jonah. Or perhaps he just brought a whale or a shark that was capable of swallowing a man to this location to swallow Jonah when he was going down. What we don't hear in this quick synopsis is that in Jonah's prayer, he says he has gone deep down into the sea, down to the gates of Sheol. Perhaps he even died. The second aspect of this account that provides fodder for the skeptic is the fact that Jesus pointed to this incident as the sign of Jonah and said that just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so would he be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. This 3 days and 3 nights has given people inordinate fits in trying to explain the Bible. There's really no reason for this difficulty, but it's arisen anyway. First of all, let's check the references. Matthew 12:38-41, the sign of Jonah. Then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered him, saying, Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. But he answered them, An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, and no sign will be given to it, except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will rise up at judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. Of course, the saying here, the idiom, is 3 days and 3 nights, and that's part of the sign, but the real sign here is, first, the resurrection of Jonah. That's the sign that the Ninevites would have seen most likely, and it's definitely the sign that Jesus is pointing to. So it's his return from the earth, not necessarily the time period that he's in the earth, that is the sign. Second, what he's pointing to is the comparison between the Ninevites who believed Jonah's preaching and these Israelites who didn't. The sign of Jonah is also mentioned in Luke 11:29-32. Notice that Matthew is written to a Jewish audience that would understand the idiom for what it was. Luke's audience is Gentile and probably wouldn't know what 3 days and 3 nights would mean, so in fact he's eliminated that reference. In verse 29 of chapter 11 we hear the sign of Jonah in Luke's gospel. When the crowds were increasing, he began to say, This generation is an evil generation. It seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given it except the sign of Jonah. For as Jonah became a sign to the people of Nineveh, so will the Son of Man be to this generation. The Queen of the South will rise up at the judgment with the men of this generation and condemn them. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and behold, something greater than Solomon is here. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. In fact, Mark, written in Rome to Roman Christians, eliminates this entirely and doesn't even relate this sign of Jonah. Now, of course, if the Bible says something once, we have to believe it. And Jesus did say once that he would rise after 3 days and 3 nights. But the greatest preponderance of his prophecy was that he would rise on the third day. In Luke, he even defines and shows us what a third day is. He says of Herod, "Tell that fox that today I am doing my work, and tomorrow and the third day." So we know that part of today, tomorrow, and a part of the next day constitutes the third day. In Acts 10, Luke even defines for us what a full 72-hour period is. He shows us that if you started on an hour on Friday, for instance, and arrived at that same hour on Monday, which is exactly 3 days and 3 nights, Cornelius refers back to that as 4 days ago. 72 full hours is 4 days in the Jewish reckoning. If Jesus were in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights, he would not rise on the third day, but on the fourth day. Even the false witnesses who get it wrong and the mockers who don't understand what Jesus meant do quote him as saying that if you tore the temple down, he would rise it up in 3 days again. And John specifies that he's speaking about his own body. So over and over, Jesus says he's going to rise on the third day. In Mark, he says after 3 days. The Pharisees themselves know what this means because they go to Pilate and say that Jesus said he was going to rise after 3 days. And then they ask for a guard, and they want it until the third day. So they know that when he said after 3 days, it actually meant on the third day. It would make no sense to have a guard until the third day and then remove it right before Jesus was supposed to rise from the grave after 3 days. That Luke account, by the way, in Luke 24, actually proves that Jesus died on Friday and was risen on Sunday, which was the first day of the week and the third day since all of these things occurred. We see that the women were at the tomb that first day. We see that later that same day, Jesus came to the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and they specified this time frame, saying that this is the same day the women had seen the empty tomb. Then they tell him, and this today is the third day since all these things happened, meaning his crucifixion and burial, and that they knew he was supposed to rise on the third day. The angels confirmed that he was supposed to rise on the third day, and then Jesus returns that evening and confirms himself that according to the scriptures, he was supposed to rise on the third day. So what do we make of 3 days and 3 nights? You've heard that Jewish reckoning is inclusive, that any portion of the 3 days constitutes 3 days and 3 nights, that it's an idiom. 3 days and 3 nights refers to a block of time that encompasses parts of 3 days. In fact, Mike Lacona teaches that perhaps 3 days isn't even specifically always 3 days, but more than 2 and perhaps less than 5. It's like saying, give me a second or give me a minute, when we don't actually mean that, or come back after a few days. As I've said elsewhere, I think that on the third day is specific. I think in the Old Testament and the New, on the third day means exactly that. There's today, tomorrow, and the third day. And the other references that say after 3 days or after 3 days and 3 nights also land on that third day. Or according to Michael Lacona, maybe they're even a different time period. The reason it could look like a different time period to me is there are 2 accounts that are kind of dovetailing in Joshua, where Joshua is consecrating the people for 3 days and the spies go to Jericho for 3 days. These 3 days seem to overlap in some way, but they're not identical, and it seems almost impossible to reconcile them as the same 3 days, although they are concurrent in many ways. What 3 days appears to be is a completeness, even a resurrection and a restoration. Mostly what I see it as is a time of preparation to go see God. When Moses was going to take the Israelites into the wilderness, he said he was going to go on a 3-day journey. Whenever people were consecrated to see God, at Mount Sinai, and then again, as mentioned, at the Jordan crossing in the book of Joshua, we see that they are consecrated for 3 days. And guess what? That's today, tomorrow, and the third day they will see God. So the third day seems to be a period of restoration or of going to see God, coming into his presence. We see both of those coming together in Genesis, wherein Joseph, who is now the second in command in Egypt, receives his brothers who are looking for food, and he throws them in jail for 3 days. But then on the third day, he is speaking to them and he releases them on that third day. So there's a third day restoration and a third day meeting with the prime minister. He's not God, but he is a high authority. We see this staggered kind of timekeeping in Kings as well. In 1 Kings 12, Jeroboam is getting ready to split the kingdom as per God's instruction through the prophet Ahishai. And he comes to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, who's going to lose those 10 tribes of the kingdom, and he brings his demands to him. Rehoboam says for him to go away for 3 days so he can think about this. So 1 Kings 12:5. He said to them, "Go away for 3 days, then come again to me." So the people went away. In 1 Kings 12:12, though, so Jeroboam and all the people came to Rehoboam the 3rd day, as the king said, "Come to me again the 3rd day." He hadn't said that, though. He said, "Go away for 3 days," and then they actually came on the 3rd day. So we see this time-encompassing 3-day motif. He said, "Go away for 3 days," and then they came back on the 3rd day. He doesn't say they were wrong to do so. In fact, the Bible confirms that that's what he instructed them to do. So had they gone away for full 3 days, they would have returned on the 4th day. But the Bible says, nope, that's not what he meant. He meant for them to come back on the 3rd day. One of the most famous restoration passages, and another type of Jesus, is the near sacrifice of Isaac. In Genesis 22, after these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham," and he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah." Moriah, in fact, is where Jerusalem is. "And offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains, of which I will tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood of the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went, both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father," he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold, the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." So they went, both of them together. I don't have to tell you much about this passage. Of course, we see Jesus prefigured throughout it, and in the end, when we see that God is providing the lamb on Mount Moriah of Jerusalem, where Jesus is crucified, this is all poignant foretelling. But something else has happened here too. We see that it was on the 3rd day that this occurred, and in Hebrews 11:17-20, we find out that this is a type of resurrection. By faith, Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, "Through Isaac shall your offspring be named." He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. By faith, Isaac invoked future blessings on Jacob and Esau. These are some of the reasons that Jesus would say, according to the scriptures, he had to be raised on the 3rd day, even though he points directly to the sign of Jonah, which was 3 days and 3 nights. Other examples are in Hosea, when Hosea says that God has smitten Israel, but will raise them up on the 3rd day, and when King Hezekiah takes ill and is going to die, but on the 3rd day he rises up again and he is well. As I've said before, the nail in the coffin for this is the chapter in Esther. Here we get both the 3 days and 3 nights referred to as on the 3rd day. From Esther 4:16 to Esther 5 verse 1, we hear Esther giving commands to the people. "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day." So there we have our 3 days and 3 nights. "And I and my young women will also fast as you do." So she's going to fast for 3 days and 3 nights. "Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. On the 3rd day, Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, in front of the king's quarters, while the king was sitting on his royal throne inside the throne room, opposite the entrance to the palace. So catch that again. She said she was going to fast with the people for 3 days and 3 nights, and then after that she was going to go to the king. So that would be on the 4th day. However, it says on the 3rd day she put on her royal robes and went to the king. So 3 days and 3 nights within this idiom is definitely not 72 full hours, but in fact encompasses only 2 evenings and parts of 3 different days. Jesus has taught this, and he has pointed to this in the Old Testament. And this one reference to Jonah being in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights not only doesn't prove otherwise, but is in fact supported by the rest of the Bible that it does include this conclusive type of dating. One final thing that's interesting here, that when Hebrews speaks about Abraham getting prepared to sacrifice Isaac, Abraham believes that he's going to be resurrected, that God will bring him back. And Hebrews says, in fact, he was resurrected in a manner of speaking. Thus we can see that Jonah, whether he was actually dead and raised from the dead, or whether he was just in the belly of the fish alive for 3 days, we can see that this is his resurrection. If he's the failed servant, if he's Israel being resurrected, we know that this occurs as well. As God speaks of returning from exile as a resurrection, Ezekiel 37, the valley of the dry bones, definitely shows this. As the bones are resurrected, sinews are added to the bones and bodies are raised. And this is symbolic of Israel coming back from its exile in Babylon. It's also prefiguring the general resurrection. Teachings on resurrection seem to be going in circles here, where the resurrection of bodies can symbolize the return of Israel from Babylon, but these returns from exile are also prefiguring the actual general resurrection of the bodies of believers. Jesus brings us out of sin, bringing us out of spiritual Babylon, captivity to Satan, and this is our resurrection, giving us new life in our hearts as the Spirit indwells us, and this is our type of resurrection. And in the end, we will be a nation restored from sin, which is a type of resurrection, but finally we'll be raised in new bodies in the new heavens and the new earth, and we will reign with him on earth in our resurrected bodies, like his physical body, permanently resurrected.